Well, thank you all so much. I didn't, Keith apparently knows my mother, and I'm sure she wrote that. What a lovely introduction. Thank you so much. Skip, thank you for having me tonight. I've been excited for weeks, really, to get to come to this the prestigious Clinton School for Public Service. I have spent my career thus far in public service. I started as a personal assistant to former governor of Tennessee, Phil Bredesen, and have continued on, as Keith said, working with the Imagination Library. So I've wound up in social service ever since I got out of school. And when I had the opportunity to come speak tonight, I don't think I could type the email out fast enough, particularly at a school that is training leaders for our country. Government leaders, social sector leaders. And so it's truly my honor. I thought I would be remiss tonight if I didn't build a case in that regard, right? Build a case for, I wanted to come talk about the Imagination Library and the impacts that it has for children and family, and not talk about, sort of build a case up for why the Imagination Library is important. And so I thought I would start talking just a little bit about literacy in general, its impact on our societies, its impact on a lot of social ills of our day, and then I move into early childhood and talk about when the pathways for literacy are first developed. And then I'll get into, of course, the Imagination Library and its impact that we're seeing around the world. So I thought I'd start off with talking just about literacy for a moment. So what is literacy? A lot of people might say that it's the ability to read and write, and they would be correct, right? It's the ability to read and write. I happen to think it's maybe just a touch more complicated than that. I found this definition that I liked: using printed and written information to function in society, to achieve one's goals, and to develop one's knowledge and potential, right? To function in society and achieve one's goals and objectives. So as I was thinking about that, I thought, well, gosh, there's a lot of things that are important, like literacy. Why wouldn't we talk perhaps about global health, gender equality, poverty relief? All these are important social ills of our day, and they need to be addressed. I found this statement that I really loved from the World Literacy Foundation. When individuals learn to read and write, they have the power to transform their problems, their own lives. To help solve socioeconomic problems facing society, we must start by building a more literate population. Individuals who know how to read and write are more likely to lift themselves out of poverty and improve their and their families' health, and sustain long-term employment. I couldn't agree more. I think the point is that of those other issues that we talked about, right? Gender equality, global health, etc. You will always be treating symptoms if you don't address literacy first, right? You will always be treating the symptoms until you allow folks to stand for themselves and solve problems for themselves. You will always be treating symptoms, and we should be treating symptoms. Don't get me wrong, we should be, but we need to be providing a solution, right? I was in Cleveland a few weeks back speaking to an organization for International Literacy Day, and I came across this quote from the Director General of UNESCO, United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. And she said this: new technologies, including mobile telephones, also offer fresh opportunities for literacy for all. We must invest more politically and financially to ensure that literacy is fully recognized as one of the most powerful accelerators of sustainable development. And then listen to this last line: the future starts with the alphabet. The future starts with the alphabet. I also thought it was particularly interesting that she mentioned new technology here in this quote, right? In mobile devices. Information is being transferred at a rate faster than the history of our species on this planet. Did you know that there are more than 1 trillion Google searches in a year? 50 million tweets a day? If you are a Facebook users, yeah, you're one of 1.49 billion Facebook users. If it were a planet, it would be the largest planet on the face of the earth, behind India and China, followed by India and China. The point is that information is changing hands at a pace faster than it ever has for those who can participate in that information exchange, right? Folks who don't participate in a literate society are not. You think the gap might be widening just a touch. So, in talking about literacy a little bit, let's talk about some areas that this might impact us, right? I took a look at unemployment. By the way, there's quite a few. We could go on quite a while with this. Unemployment, illiterate persons earn 30 to 42% less than their literate counterparts and will struggle for their entire careers with promotions and decreased productivity. 75% of Americans who receive food stamps perform at the lowest 2 levels of literacy. By the way, there are 5 literacy levels according to the federal government. Right? There's been a couple of national literacy studies that have been done. And they've looked at, it's a little more complicated than is someone illiterate or are they literate, right? They said, well, let's drill down a little bit. Let's peel back the layers a little bit more and take a look. And so what they found is that there are varying degrees, obviously, of literacy. The lower 2 literacy levels, 1 and 2. 1 would be what we would call functionally illiterate. 2 would be what we would call low literate. And 75% of Americans who receive food stamps perform at the lowest 2. Crime. This one, I couldn't believe this, actually, when I first came across. In the U.S. alone, 85% of all juveniles involved in the juvenile justice system are functionally illiterate. About half of adults entering the prison system never finished high school, and over 70% of the current inmates cannot read above a 4th grade level. You think there might be a correlation here with literacy? This one is particularly interesting because when you look to here at the Clinton School for Public Service, when you look to our legislature, this is actually one of the few things that at the legislative level people agree on, right? Republicans and Democrats, they agree on this. Our prison system is out of control. So if you were going to look at how do we potentially reduce the prison population in this country, and you knew these statistics, when you take a look at literacy as a potential solution? Last one I'll look at is health. Illiteracy significantly limits a person's ability to access, understand, and apply health-related information, costing the healthcare industry over $73 million annually. And patients with low literacy skills have a 50% increased risk of hospitalization. The cost we've had a national healthcare debate going on for quite a while. The cost to our healthcare system is astounding. I'll talk about it a little bit more in a minute, but literacy levels 1 and 2 are going to have very hard times interacting with healthcare providers, hospitals, reading prescription drug labels, etc. So, with that in mind, talking a little bit about the impacts on our society, how might we be doing? I thought you'd be interested to take a real quick, globally speaking, how we might be doing. 1 out of 5 people in the roughly 7 billion people around the world cannot read that sentence right there. Not because it's in English, couldn't read it in their native tongue. They just can't read. 20%. I don't know how many folks are in here tonight, but if this folks in the room tonight were representative of the world population, let's say there's 100 people in here, and I asked the illiterate folks to stand up, 20 people would stand up. Even more interesting, perhaps, is if I asked all 20 of them to come up to the front of the room, you would see that 2 out of 3 of them would be women. So, how are we doing in the U.S.? A lot of people think, we're the U.S., right? We're doing great. It's one of the best countries in the world. It is. It is. In a literacy study among 20 high-income countries, the U.S. ranked 12th. About 22%, 4 million. Now, there's about 320 million people in the United States, and so we're talking about the adults, 18 or over, is about 200 million or so. Almost 25% of them function at literacy level 1, functionally illiterate. Another 28% Another 50 million function at literacy level 2. This is a huge chunk of our population that cannot read a story written above a 4th grade reading level. Literacy level 1 can't read a simple story. They will have, as I mentioned earlier, significant issues reading a prescription drug label, instructions on how to give medicine to their children. I think that might make you a little reluctant to go fill out the 4 pages of information they ask you for to take your child to the hospital, perhaps? How are we doing? Woo, how are we doing in Arkansas? This is pretty interesting stuff now. So about 14% of Arkansas adults lack basic prose literacy skills. That's about national average, right? About national average. Arkansas is not national average in these next 2. 48th in the U.S. in college graduation rates. Really good at sending kids to college, but 48th in the country at graduating them. And Arkansas ranks 36th in the nation for children reading at grade level by the end of 3rd grade. Bottom 20 in the U.S. for 4th and 8th grade literacy and math test scores. I saved this one for last because I'm going to use this to transition over into early childhood. A lot of you in the audience tonight may have heard for really what's a national campaign that's going on at the moment called the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. It takes a look at 3rd grade reading scores, right? Reading scores at the end of 3rd grade. Why? Because if a child is not reading at grade level by the end of 3rd grade, all sorts of terrible things happen, right? The rate of their high school graduation plummets. The likelihood of them being incarcerated skyrockets. It's not a good picture. So the fact that Arkansas is 36th in the nation for children reading at grade level by 3rd grade is an issue. So we've talked a little bit now about literacy and some of its impacts on our society. And I'm going to transition over into the early childhood part tonight and using an analogy, and that is, let's say that all of these folks that we've been talking about, right, all of these illiterate, low literate, functionally illiterate folks are in a pool. And you have a spout of water pouring into that pool, right? These are children that are born, they're not getting the education, the skills that they need, and they're being added to this pool. And so what we're talking about doing is, how do we dry up that pool? If you were tasked, if you walked in a room and this were the scenario, what's the first thing you would do? Anybody, you can scream it out at me. Turn off the spigot, right? You would turn off the spigot. It would be absolute madness to try to go dry up this pool, right? Free these folks, give them literacy. It'd be madness to try to take on that effort when you have a spout pouring more into the pool. So let's talk about the spout, right? How early are we talking? Let's say we want to turn the spout off. Let's say that you would even turn it off as much as you could, even if it was still trickling. You'd turn it back as far as you could go. So what are we talking about? When we talk about children coming into, or adults, when the brain development, when the literacy pathways are developed in the brain, how early are we talking? So I'm going to talk just for a few seconds about brain science, and I hope you don't fall out of your chairs here. This is actually really interesting. I know I'm a little nerdy when it comes to this, but this is fascinating stuff. But it requires a little bit of knowledge about the brain and how it develops, okay? The human brain is made up of brain cells. You ever hear somebody say, you're killing brain cells? Those brain cells are called neurons. And when the human brain is born, it's full of neurons, but they're multiplying at a rate faster than they ever will in the rest of the history of this person's life, this child's life. These neurons, as they develop neural pathways in the brain, right? So they reach out to one another and make a connection at a point called a synapse, right? So there's a neuron out here, and they reach together and connect at a synapse. And that's what an electrical impulse travels down, right? It allows me to move my arm. It allows me to talk to you based on these neural pathways that develop. So let's take a look at how these develop in the brain. You'll see that first column there is newborns. The second is 1 month, third is 9 months, 2 years, and then adult. What's interesting here, though, is that if you look at the 2-year-old, it's actually more of a tangled web than the adult. Could that be possible? Could that be possible? Could there be more neural pathways for a 2-year-old than in an adult? Yes, there are. Yes, there are. Let me explain a little bit further. This was put together by Harvard University Center for the Developing Child, and what you're looking at, I don't know how well you can see that, but there's a little pink box underneath where the first year is written underneath there, but that's a little pink box. And that pink box represents the first 12 months of a child's life. And then afterwards, sequentially, you have year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4. And the colored humps on there represent development of neural pathways, right? That's those pathways that I talked about with the synapses that the electrical impulses travel down. So the blue one is language. The yellow one is vision and hearing pathways. Red one is higher cognitive function. What's interesting about this is you'll see that these neural pathways are developing at a rate or are developed higher in the first year of life than they will ever be for the rest of this little human being's life. There's more development happening in the first year. Even in higher cognitive function, you get out past 4 or 5 years old, it's already peaked. So what's interesting about this is, see, well, that's great. We develop all these neural pathways. That's terrific, right? No. It is if they're used. If they're used. But the brain, the body is a magnificent animal, isn't it, right? It's full of systems, respiratory system, cardiovascular system, neural system. The brain is the, if you were taking an assessment of the body, and let's say you were taking an assessment of, say, assessment of a house, right, to determine its energy efficiency. And you wanted to see which item in this house was using the most energy, right? If you did that on the body, the brain far and away uses more energy than any other single organ in the human body. 20%, right? So you eat food, you drink water, 20% of the energy that's generated from that goes to the human brain. So, as such, it functions very, very efficiently. And these synapses that are developed in a child's brain early in life, if they're not used, being the efficient organ that it is, the brain just prunes them away. They're gone, right? Unless you stimulate those synapses, right? Unless you stimulate those neural pathways, right? I have 2 little ones. They go outside and get a shovel full of dirt and dump it in the dog's water and make mud and wipe it all over their face. They're little scientists, right? They're learning, they're developing these neural pathways. When we read to them, we're stimulating these neural pathways in their brain. If those are not used in a number of ways, right? Comprehensive way for a child, the brain will just prune those away. The really scary thing is many of them will never come back, ever. You'll never get them back. If you miss the first 5 years, you have missed a tremendous opportunity in a child's life. I would venture to guess that very few people in this room know a gentleman by the name of Dr. John Hutton. He's a pediatrician, world-renowned pediatrician and a neuroscientist. He's in Cincinnati with Cincinnati Children's. And we've launched the Imagination Library citywide for every child in Cincinnati. And I had lunch with Dr. Hutton earlier this year. And he talked with me about this research. It just came out earlier this year. And what he's been doing is brain scans, right? fMRIs, it's called. He's been doing brain scans on children. So what he'll do is he'll hook them up to an MRI machine and play a recording of a story, not show them a picture book, right? He'll play them a recording of a story and just have them listen to it and watch what happens in their brain. And when he does that, there's a few areas of the brain on the left-hand back portion of the brain that light up, right? The hotter that is, the more activity that you see. What's interesting about this is the areas that light up are most closely associated with visual imagery and association, meaning and association. So what's happening there? It's what you and I do all the time, right? You read a story to a child, and they draw pictures in their head, right? They're drawing pictures in their mind and associating them with things. It's not just things that we see every day. They're doing this with sounds and letters and words, but also things that we see every day, right? They're drawing associations in their mind. I don't have the slide. I looked for it and I couldn't find it, but Dr. Hutton also has a slide where he did brain scans of children who have been read to early in life and children who have not. In this area right here in the brain, there's a dark spot. What happened? The brain pruned those neural pathways away. They won't come back. So, we've looked a little bit at literacy, we've looked a little bit at brain science, and let's suppose that you're with me so far, right? Right? You understand early childhood is important, right? Literacy is important, and getting to a child early is important. What do you do? Right? What do you do? There's a gentleman by the name of Dr. James Heckman. He's a professor of economics at the University of Chicago, Nobel laureate, and one of the best-known experts in economics of human development. And he's done a lot of work on the social impact, right, of early childhood in particular. If you're interested, I think it's jamesheckman.org. It's a lot of fantastic stuff. But this is one that he came up with, and I know it's hard to read that little bar on the side there, but it's basically rate of return, right, for dollar invested, rate of return. And you'll see that on the far left out there, that's prenatal. The yellow bar there is programs targeted towards the earliest years, and the blue bar is preschool programs. And then the red is school, K through 12, and then you have job training, post-school. Now, what's interesting about this is 95% of all public education dollars go in that red box right there, K through 12. 95%. 85% of this child's brain is developed by age 5 before they arrive at the red bar. 85%. We've missed a tremendous window here, right? If you told me, Jeff, this is your financial future here, and right now you have all of your cash invested in that red bar, is that where you want to be? I think I might put a little bit more in the yellow and the blue bar. A little bit, right? Test it out. The return on investment in early childhood is well documented. I mean, we're in the $8, $9, $10 for every dollar invested range. It's unquestionable. And yes, we do need to be investing in quality pre-K. But look at this. What about those first 3 years, 0 to 3? What do we do? We've arrived at the question of our day in terms of early childhood, right? What do you do? How do you get to those children before they arrive at an institution? How do you connect with that family? What do you do? I'm going to talk about what we're doing. But first, I want to tell you about a study that was done that has nothing to do with the Imagination Library. Matter of fact, they were surprised at their findings. But it very much makes a case towards making sure that children have books in the home early. It's a study done by Mariah Evans, University of Nevada Associate Professor of Sociology and Resource Economics, interestingly enough. 20 years, 27 countries, 70,000 cases is one of the largest and most comprehensive studies ever on what influences the level of education a child will attain. As far as research goes, across the gamut here, this is massive. This is massive study that they did. Number one most important factor that they determined, survey says, books in the home. Books in the home had a greater impact than any single factor that they could pick out in the number of the level of education that a child will attain. How many, you might ask? As few as 20 books in the child's home could make a difference of up to 3.2 years of additional schooling in that child's life. Mariah Evans said, she was asked about the study, and she said, the results of this study indicate that getting some books into their homes is an inexpensive way that can help these children succeed. She said her researchers were struck by the strong effect books in the home had on children's educational attainment, even above and beyond such factors as education level of the parents, the country's GDP, father's occupation, in the political system of the country. Whoa, right? For a long time, parents' education level has been it, right? You look at parents' education level and you look at income level. I'm not saying those aren't factors, but that was a tremendous study that was done that shown otherwise, right? So I want to use that as a jumping off point into talking to you about what we do with the Imagination Library and the impact that we see it having. As a real quick sort of background on the Imagination Library, I think it's been mentioned already that obviously we're mailing age-appropriate books to children at home on a monthly basis. The backstory behind it is sort of revolves around this lady right here. I'm sure a lot of you know her, Miss Dolly Parton, singer, actress, songwriter. The program comes from a very personal place for her. She created it a little over 20 years ago. And she grew up, for those of you who don't know much about her, she grew up very, very poor, one of 12 children in a very rural part of our state. She recalls growing up that that her father left for work before the sun came up and came home after the sun went down, worked himself to death, trying to support 12 children. And still recalls that they certainly didn't have everything that they wanted, and not everything that they needed sometimes, but they made it through. They made it through. And when she went on and became a success and landed at the place of, so where is my place? When I look at how do I give back to the world, where is my place in this? Those experiences as a child had a tremendous impact on her. She remembers, right? Dolly's a big dreamer. If you know anything about Dolly, she's a dreamer. She had big dreams as a little girl. And she remembers that time. She also remembers not having any books in their home except for one, the Bible. And so she created the Imagination Library to make sure that children in her hometown did not grow up in a house that didn't have books. So we created the Imagination Library, and it was originally just for children in her hometown where she grew up. And she went on, her father has since passed away, but she did at one point have a conversation with her dad and asked him and said, "Daddy, are you proud of me for what I've done?" You know, thinking that he was going to say, yes, the Grand Ole Opry or all these platinum albums and all this tremendous body of work that she's done. And he looked at her and said, "I'm more proud of you for being called the book lady than anything else that you've done." And that has meant a tremendous amount to her. It's why she remains to this day so heavily involved in our work at the foundation, why she's at board meetings, all of that stuff. It comes from a very personal place from her. So as I mentioned, the Imagination Library mails a high-quality, age-appropriate book each month to the homes of registered children between the ages of birth and 5 years old. It costs about $2.10 per child per month. That's to purchase the book and mail it to the home. So you may be thinking, wait a minute, $2.10 to mail a high-quality book to a child at home. Yes, the Dollywood Foundation heavily subsidizes this work, as you can imagine. But we have local partners, thousands of local partners all across the country that help us cover this wholesale cost of the book and mailing locally. So where are we? Right now, as I mentioned, it started in Dolly's hometown. In the year 2000, after a tremendous amount of pressure and calling for the Imagination Library outside of her hometown, she made the program available for replication. Since that time, we've been working pretty hard, I have to say. In the United States, we now have, my slide's a little bit dated here, we have about 850,000 children enrolled receiving a book every single month. In Canada, about 14,000 children. In the UK, just over 30,000 children and 3,600 children enrolled in Australia. To date, right as I stand here, we're mailing just over 890,000 books a month to children in these 4 countries. But as you can see, the lion's share of that is in the United States by far. We're celebrating 20 years, as I mentioned. We're mailing almost 900,000 books a month. This number changes rapidly, but we've mailed 73 million books to children since we got started 23 years ago. I wonder if my battery's wearing out on this thing here. So one of the reasons why I've been in Arkansas quite a few times this year has to do with this next slide. In 2014, we took a look at the Imagination Library, coming up on roughly 20 years worth of work, and said, so where are we, how are we doing, and where do we want to go? And we got to looking at it and realized that we were mailing at the time to about 4% of every child in the United States under the age of 5 was receiving an Imagination Library book every month. And we thought, wow, what if that were 10%? 1 out of every 10 children in the United States under the age of 5. We couldn't think of anything, billion-dollar federally funded programs that have that level of reach. So we set that out as our goal. Roughly 19 million children, 0 to 5 in the United States. And in 10 years from now, we plan on mailing almost 2 million books a month. Right? So I went with Allison yesterday over to Club 99 Rotary, and we heard Dr. Smothers speak. If you haven't heard him speak, he's a really exciting speaker. He's the new president of Philander Smith College, one of 4 historically black colleges in Arkansas. But of course, Philander Smith's right here. And he said a quote yesterday that this slide immediately jumped out in my mind. And it was something along the lines of, if your dreams don't scare you a bit, you're not dreaming big enough, right? This one scares us just a little bit, I have to be honest with you. It scares us a touch. But this is our big dream. So we set about the process of, well, how do we do this, right? What additional resources do we bring to bear to make this happen? And can we look out across the country and find natural places of synergy where there's good people already working and see if we can't make large-scale programs happen, statewide programs happen, something similar like what we've been able to do in Tennessee. And as we looked around, Arkansas was one of the states. It's one of literally a handful, 3 or 4 states that we're doing significant work in at the moment, bringing additional resources to bear. And I have to say, I've been pleasantly surprised as we've gone around and talked with leadership across the state of Arkansas. I have been thrilled and amazed and excited at the response that we've received, right? Publicly elected leaders are responding. They're meeting with us. They're excited about the program like we are. And it has been so warming and so welcoming. I had no doubt that we are going to develop a statewide program in Arkansas. I'm going to talk a little bit more about it. I'm getting ahead of myself. So we've talked now about the importance of literacy, the point in a child's life of when this development begins happening, which is right away, right? Right away when that child is born. And we've talked about the Imagination Library and what it does, right? Mailing books into the home. So let's talk about the impact. What do we see? Is the Imagination Library making a difference? There are probably 10 studies I would love to have paraded out in front of you tonight. I know I don't have that level of time, so I picked out a few. You'll have to also, when folks look at the Imagination Library from a research perspective, they really look at 2 areas, right? Can you impact home literacy environment and kindergarten readiness, right? The studies that I've pulled out to share with you tonight all look at kindergarten readiness, making the assumption that if they've properly controlled for the right variables, right, it almost necessitates that home literacy environment has changed, right? So that's what I've pulled out to share with you tonight. There was a study done in Syracuse, New York. Syracuse has a citywide, actually the county-wide program now. And they looked at children coming into the kindergarten system. They had been in the Imagination Library for 3 or 4 years, right, a full cycle. Right, they've received the Imagination Library for almost all of their preschool years. And they gave them the nationally normed Ames web test, and in particular looked at the letter naming fluency screener. Why would they look at the letter naming fluency screener? Because it is identified frequently as the best single indicator of risk for reading failure. It is shown to have strong ability to predict future grade reading, vocabulary, and language. Right? So this is important. What did they find? They found that children entering kindergarten who had participated in the Imagination Library for 3 or more years, as opposed to children who had not, were almost 30% better prepared on the letter naming fluency measure than children who had not, right? 30%. I'm mailing a book into their home every month. So the natural yeah, but in me, right? I'm sure it is in you too, says, yeah, but are these families are these wealthy families, right? Are these families with high level of education? Are these all purple kids, you know? What's interesting about this particular study is they controlled for race, gender, age, ESL status, special education status, free and reduced lunch status, and these results were statistically significant even after controlling for all these variables. Right? Amazing. So let's look at another one. Those are kids up in New York, right? That's a strange, far-off place up in there in New York, isn't it? Let's look at one a little bit closer. Memphis, Tennessee. It's a little bit closer, a couple hours away. So in Memphis, they took a look at the Imagination Library. Interestingly enough, they did something very similar, right? They looked at children entering kindergarten, but then also looked at second grade. Said, do we still see this, right? Do we still see these impacts in second grade? The prior findings said that children who participated in the Imagination Library program prior to kindergarten entry had statistically significant higher kindergarten readiness scores in language and math. Interesting, right? Than children who had not. Then they followed up. They tracked these children, right? They followed them into second grade and said, let's have another look. And what did they find? Our analysis indicates that students who participated in the Imagination Library program prior to kindergarten entry had higher scores in reading development in second grade compared to students who had not participated. Also, significant differences in vocabulary and reading comprehension, the two subtests most fundamentally linked to early reading experiences, are the two that showed significant differences between IL participants and non-participants, namely vocabulary and reading comprehension, right? Yeah, but they also control for socioeconomic status and gender, and still saw these results. But again, this is Memphis, right? They are on the other side of the river. Is there perhaps, oh, by the way, before I forget, they did repeat this study, same exact thing, kindergarten readiness, and then a look at second grade in Indianola, Mississippi, and found almost identical results. So it's been replicated in another location. So is there an example in Arkansas, perhaps, that we can look at, right? Our children are special and unique. By the way, your children are special and unique. Everybody's children are special and unique. Impact, right? It's a Desark study, okay? I need to set this one up a little bit, okay? So I believe the Imagination Library was launched in Desark in 2005. And it took them a few years in Desark, in this particular community, to build up to what we would call full enrollment, right? So to have a significant number of children in the community enrolled. So in 2009, they had a significant number of children in the community enrolled. So they needed to wait for a while to let a full cycle happen, right? You would have in 2013, 4 years later, they had a full cohort of children entering the kindergarten system that had been enrolled in the Imagination Library for 3 or 4 years, right? This are the kindergarten scores according to the Koalas Readiness Assessment, right, which is currently used in Arkansas, and I think this is last year. Dr. Jackie Govan today, I think this is last year. Kindergarten scores in 2005. Remember, this is the year we launched the Imagination Library, okay? The red bar is not developed. By the way, oral communication, written language, math concepts, attentive behavior, and general knowledge, right? Children are all assessed when they enter kindergarten. The red bar is not developed, blue bar is developing, and green bar is developed. So again, did the same assessment, 2013, and what happened? Whoa, where did that red bar go? It's all of a sudden gone. The not developed bar for Des Arc Elementary School disappeared, right? Meaning that all children were either demonstrating the skills that the teachers were looking for, or they were proficient in them. There were none demonstrated skills that were totally lacking. Now, to be fair, there are great programs, early childhood programs going on in Des Arc, right? They have Head Start, they have pre-K, state and private. There are some terrific programs. There's some terrific programs in early childhood in general going on around the state, right? Hippie, Arkansas Kids Read, aimed at children in school. Reach Out and Read, I believe you have. There's some tremendous programs, right? But take a look at this. This is the program that they did, Imagination Library. Rick Burns, who's the superintendent, by the way, at Des Arc, for Des Arc, sent us a letter after they did this. And this is what Rick had to say. We began seeing an improvement in kindergarten readiness within just a year or two after implementing the Imagination Library. Our students' scores on the quals and the literacy portion of the benchmark exams have improved vastly over the past few years. He closed by saying, I firmly believe that we would not be performing at this level without the help of the Imagination Library. This is the superintendent of schools. Pretty powerful stuff. So, we're not just doing the program in Des Arc, right? This is where we're doing the program in Arkansas. All of these green counties in green here are where we're currently offering a program. We're currently offering the Imagination Library in those counties. The yellow counties here are on what we call committed status. That means they're about to launch the Imagination Library program. And you'll see some maroon stars there. Those are large cities where there's not perhaps county-wide coverage, but there's a large city offering the program, right? I just learned today, we had a steering committee today, and I just learned that there are quite a few more counties coming on board. You may happen to notice that the county that we're standing in here, Pulaski County, is white, right? Not covered. We knew when we came into Arkansas and developed a strategy for the statewide coverage, that Pulaski County was going to be key for us, right? It's where the capital is. It's an important community in the state. And when we brought additional resources to bear to the state, for example, we brought a team member on, Allison Johnson, who's here tonight, to help us pull off this work, right? Help us raise funds across Arkansas, help us establish communities. There's quite a few members of our steering committee here tonight. I'm not going to dare try to name them because I would surely leave one out. But we put a steering committee together to help us do this work, and they have been magnificent. And we've been working on it for quite a while now, but there's that Pulaski County that's just nagging us, right? Just nagging us. And here within the past few months, as we've reached out to the steering committee and Allison and I, we've reached out to the leaders across Arkansas, those leaders that I told you have been so helpful. There have been some remarkable response from public leaders. I wanted to recognize one of them who came tonight, Representative Clark Tucker. And Clark is leading the way for us to launch a program in Pulaski County. And we couldn't be more appreciative. And we're so excited. I have no doubt that within the next couple of years, perhaps even shorter time than that, you're going to see this map full of green. And we're really excited about that. We're really excited about what that means for children across the state of Arkansas. I thought I'd share this with you real quick. So out of the 75 counties or so, we have roughly 40 counties that are offering the program. There's about 13,000 or so children enrolled out of 198,000 eligible. So there's some work to do, right? To date, we've mailed about 642,000 books. As I mentioned, we have the steering committee in place. We have Allison in place in the upcoming launch in Pulaski County. And we are thrilled, absolutely thrilled. I thought I would close tonight. I titled this talk, Winning a Child's Heart. And I wanted to close tonight with this because it's really easy to get wrapped up in data and studies and all those sorts of things. The importance of reading to children early and the brain science and all this. And lose sight of what this means to a child and what, by and large part, a lot of times what it means to a family, right? We have a saying at the Dollywood Foundation that a child will continue to do what that child loves. Okay? The point here is that a child is not a rational actor in this, right? When you're a child, the world is open. It's imagination. You can do anything. You can become anything, right? The opportunity is afoot. I loved this quote from Lois Bridges. She said, "Yes, on some level, reading is about letters, sounds, and words, but let's not become so focused on the mechanics and the minutia that we lose sight of what made us readers." What made us readers? Skills, drills, and exercise and exams will never create the thrill that's needed to win a child's heart and make him or her a reader. I don't know if any of you in this room were lucky enough to remember sitting on your parents' lap and having your parents read a story to you, or perhaps your grandparents. It's every bit as much about all the science and stuff that we talked about as that moment, right? That bond that happens with the child when they're sitting on the lap of someone who's holding him in their arms, which basically says, I love you and care about you enough to give you this one-on-one time and share a story with you, right? And the child gets to take an adventure to a far-off place that they've never been before and experience things that they've never adventured. And trust me, all the science is happening, right? All the science is happening. But we cannot miss the fact that it's an opportunity to win a child's heart and make them a reader for life. I'm going to close in a unabashed, proud daddy moment and show you the two little hearts that I'm winning every day. This is my almost 4-year-old son, Finn, and my almost 2-year-old daughter, Lily. I'm Jeff Conyers, Executive Director of the Dollywood Foundation, home of Dolly Parton's Imagination Library. It has been my great honor to get to come and share this with you tonight. And I certainly appreciate the Clinton School for Public Service, appreciate Skip for having me, and thank you all so very much.
Some questions?
Love to.
Thanks, Jeff. Okay, we got some time for questions. So, yes, Shim, right there.
My name is Shim Nguya from Malawi, Africa. I'm a Clinton student first year. And I have a few questions for you.
Sure.
Just, I think, two. The first thing is that I observed that Africa is not there in terms of the Imagination Library.
Right.
But my question is very simple. How can a nonprofit from Malawi, Africa, benefit from the Imagination Library if they have the willingness and the capacity to do so? Because right now we stand at 62.7% literacy rate,
Yep.
and 80% of the population lives in the rural area and lives under $1 a day, and that is very difficult for parents to provide reading materials.
Right.
But for a willing organization that has the facilities, what can you do to help a willing organization like that?
It's a very astute question. Actually, it's a huge issue for our organization as we look at the future of the Dollywood Foundation, as we look at growing the program across the world. I don't know if you might happen to have noticed that the counties that we're currently offering the program all happen to be developed English-speaking countries with well-developed postal systems, right? That's the model. It requires a postal system, well-developed postal system, to deliver the book to a child at home every month. Our challenge, as we look outside of areas like that, are how do we change and adapt the model to get books to children in areas where there's not a well-developed postal system, right? Or the model doesn't hold, but still have it be a meaningful and impactful program in a child's life, right? Part of the whole benefit here is the child arriving, or the book arriving for the child with their little name on the label, right? And it's mine, it's a gift from me. And how do we recreate that while shifting the model? We've actually hired a new team member to take on this issue. We haven't solved it yet. But if you'll hang in there with us, this one, actually we're entertaining a potential partner in South Africa. It's a primarily English-speaking country. That's the other challenge for us as well, is language and dialect. So it's one that we are keen on tackling. I'm not sure how we're going to do this, frankly, but it's one that we're interested in doing. We believe that every child in the world should have access to books as they're growing up, so stay tuned.
Yes, ma'am, right here.
Hi, wow, I talk loud enough. My name is Tina Watson. I'm with Hippie USA. Thank you for mentioning us.
Yes.
While you were talking, I looked on your website and I noticed your partners. You don't have any home visiting model partners. So have you ever thought about partnering with the home visiting network to actually reach more children by 2024?
Yes, we have. Thank you for the question. We sure have. As a matter of fact, one of the studies that I did not show you tonight was one that was released this year by Parents as Teachers, right? Home visiting model. They received a large federal grant called Innovative Approaches to Literacy, I believe it was called. And what they did with that grant was they continued the Parents as Teachers model that they have, home visitation model, and added in the Imagination Library, right, as an enhancement, if you will, right? So to change the home literacy environment by increasing the number of books in the home and thereby increasing the availability of print material in the home to interact with. I wish I could rattle off, I probably have the slide, I wish I could rattle off the statistics to you, but the results were nothing short of remarkable. We, at the Imagination Library, will often say, we love the program, right, but it's not a panacea, right? You're not going to mail books into a child's home and the skies open up and all of our problems are solved, right? This is going to take a lot of people working together to solve, particularly when it comes to something like a cultural change in the home, right, with a parent and their young children. Try telling them what to do, right? So it's going to take a lot of partners. I happen to think that there is a lot of opportunity with the Imagination Library and home visitation models. The problem that we've run into thus far, the reason the Innovative Approaches to Literacy grant worked with Parents as Teachers was because there was so much money, and the Imagination Library, of course, is scalable, but it allowed Parents as Teachers to scale with us, right? I think there's a scalability issue that we've run into so far with home visitation models, right? This is intense work. It's very costly work. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity to work together, and we are working with Hippie and Parents as Teachers overall, but we've got a ways to go. There's a lot of ways to go there. So thank you again for the question.
Question right back here in the back.
Hi, my name is Xochitl Delgado Solorzano. I'm a first-year student here at the Clinton School. And my question kind of stems off from what Shem's question was. But here in Arkansas, I noticed that one of the counties where y'all are working is Washington County. And that's a county that has a large Latino population. Right. And within Washington County is Springdale, which has the second largest Marshallese population in the country. Do y'all provide language-appropriate books for these students so that parents can read to their children? Mm-hmm.
So the books are age-appropriate. Language-appropriate perhaps is in the eye of the beholder, right? We've received a lot of feedback on language-appropriate books on both sides of the aisle. You really wouldn't believe the conversation that's happened. When we started the Imagination Library in the United States, we began mailing books, a few books out of each, so they're age-appropriate, depending on, so the 0 to 1, 1 to 2, et cetera. There were at least a couple of books for a child every year that they would receive that had Spanish and English language in the books, right? We had to stop that a few years ago when we began mailing books into Canada, because the first Spanish-English book we sent into Canada, we had 400 calls saying, wait a minute, there are not many Spanish-English speakers up here, but we do want French-English books, right? So we had to just go to all English books. The great news, though, is that with the 2016 library, we were able to solve that problem. So we're going to go back to now where we have 2 out of every age group is going to have bilingual Spanish-English titles. Now, does that address everyone's preferable literacy requests? No, but it's a step in the right direction. The Latino population in this country, as you and I know very well, is growing at an unbelievable pace. And I think there's every bit of room for Spanish-English titles in the Imagination Library, and we're thrilled to be able to offer it again back in 2016.
Yes, sir, right here.
I watched Dolly's commencement address at the University of Tennessee.
Sure.
And read the book that came out of it. How did that impact this work?
Yeah. You know, what's interesting, that's a great question, and thank you for it. I think the answer is that the work impacted the book, right? I think that was probably more accurate. The book, so by the way, Dolly accepted an honorary doctorate from the University of Tennessee. And as a result, she interestingly enough, as somebody who performs in front of large audiences all the time, hates public speaking. Right? She just is not, it makes her nervous. She said she was peeping out from behind the curtain and looking, just was nervous to give this speech to a room full of UT graduates. But afterwards, she wrote a book called Dream More. And it was based on some of the principles that are in our mission statement, dream more, care more, learn more, and be more. But she talks a lot in the book, as you know, about her experiences as a little girl in the Imagination Library and how it's had an overall impact on her life as a result. So it's been a great experience, to put that book together, and we've thoroughly enjoyed it. But I think the Imagination Library helped inform the book. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, there we go. Ms. Abrams.
Yes, ma'am.
I want to go back to the development of the brain as it relates to literacy.
Yes, ma'am.
And I want to connect it to public policy as it relates to literacy, and that literacy is a national defense issue for our nation. I want to know, is there some research out there that talks about the brain development of the parents of children of the age group that we know where their brains are? What I'm saying is, if we know the development of the brain of the parents who will have these children on their laps, and we know they're getting younger and younger, parents of today. Is there any research that tells you the importance of how you make that gap closer?
So yes and no is the answer. In terms of, is there a way for us to evaluate the developmental stage of a parent, right? And how that might be impacting their experience with the Imagination Library. There are none that I know of, right? There are none that I know of. We do have, as I shared a few of them, some national statistics on what the adults in this country are, and of course, theoretically, those adults are the parents. We do know that 1 out of 4 are struggling so bad with literacy that they are going to have a really difficult time reading a simple story to a child. And that's a big problem. A couple of really neat anecdotal sort of stories is we've experienced this with the Imagination Library, that we've had parents, grandparents write to us and say, I was inspired to take an adult literacy class because my grandchild brought me a book and I struggle to read it to him. We've had, countless letters, no kidding, from prison. Well, fathers will write us a letter from prison and say, please enroll my child in the Imagination Library so they don't wind up like me, right? So I'm not directly answering your question. I think the answer is not really, not really. There have been some light work that looked at, does having the Imagination Library in a community inspire more activity in adult literacy, for example? And yes, that's the case. There's no rigorous studies that have been done, but we do see that time and time again across the country. So I think there's a real opportunity there. Again, we definitely need to be working in K through 12 and with adults and workforce development. We need to be addressing all of these issues, but to completely leave out the source is madness, right? We need to be addressing the symptoms, but you can't miss that first 5 years.
Public policy makers around the country, how are they understanding this as a national defense to promote literacy?
It's an interesting question. So I think I'm a firm believer in meeting people where they are, right? When you speak to someone about an issue, national defense may not be their issue, right? But economic and community development might be, right? Public health might be. The great thing is with the Imagination Library and brain development is that it impacts all of that. National security, public health, all of that is impacted. And so when I see people talk to our leaders of the country about the Imagination Library, about early childhood development in particular, and public policy, the most successful people talk to those leaders in a place where they are, right? And address it from an issue that matters to them, right? I think the other hopefully really effective way is invitations to come speak at fine institutions like the Clinton School for Public Service, right? Hopefully there's 100 people out there, 100,000 people watching tonight, right? We need people to know and understand. Brain research has changed, right? We've learned more in the past 10 years about how a brain develops than the previous 200, right? We just know more now. What it's up to us to do is to share it with people, right? It's to share it with our leaders. Share it with the people who are making policy for our country and in our communities and let them know, right? They will respond, right? Representative Tucker, they will respond. Trust me, we see it. Yes,
Jeff, thank you. Notwithstanding the great work that Allison and Clark are doing to take this statewide and particularly in Pulaski County, and I support those efforts. I think that's exactly right. I must say, it was uplifting to see you raise the example of Des Arc, Arkansas, because too often in this state and in the country, small towns, rural towns, underpopulated, underserved areas are neglected, overlooked, put on studies for months. You all went to Des Arc. The results are pretty phenomenal. And I think this program, which started in rural America, certainly is going to make an impact in urban America, and I hope it goes statewide, and we thank you for being here tonight.
My pleasure. Thank you all so much. It's super good. Thank you. Appreciate it.